Ladies and gentlemen, today we confront a striking question echoing through the corridors of global finance and politics. Has the United States moved to clear Pakistan's loans within the IMF? On the surface, it sounds like a gesture of goodwill, a helping hand extended to a struggling nation burdened with debt. But if history has taught us anything, it is that nothing in the world of economics and politics ever comes without strings attached. When Washington intervenes in debt arrangements, it is rarely an act of charity. It is an act of strategy. Let us step back and understand what's at stake here. Pakistan, like many developing economies, has been locked in the cycle of IMF dependency, borrowing to stabilize its currency, borrowing to pay off previous loans, borrowing to cover deficits created by structural imbalances. For decades, the IMF has been both the doctor and the disease, prescribing austerity, enforcing privatization, and cutting subsidies that ordinary Pakistanis desperately rely upon. And now, if the US suddenly steps in to clear or restructure these obligations, one has to ask, is this really about Pakistan, or is it about America's own geopolitical interests in South Asia? Here's the hook. Washington knows that Pakistan's position is unique. It is a bridge between China and the Middle East, a corridor of the Belt and Road Initiative, a nation armed with nuclear capabilities, and a partner that can either tilt east toward Beijing or west toward Washington. By intervening in IMF matters, the US signals to Islamabad, we are still the gatekeepers of your economic future. That is not generosity, it is leverage. Think about the timing as tensions with China intensify, as the US seeks to counterbalance Beijing's expanding financial influence. What better way to reassert dominance than by offering Pakistan a lifeline through the IMF? But let's be clear, that lifeline comes with conditions. It may not be written in the headlines, but behind closed doors, the conversations often go like this. Military alignment, foreign policy concessions, and market access for American corporations. This is how global power works. Loans are not just financial contracts. They are instruments of political control. Now, I want you to imagine the everyday Pakistani worker. He hears news of debt relief and thinks, finally, some relief will come. But in reality, debt restructuring often means more austerity, more cuts, and more dependency on imports. The cycle doesn't end, it deepens. The real beneficiaries of such arrangements are not the farmers in Punjab, not the workers in Karachi, but the elite political class aligned with Washington and the multinational corporations eager to profit from privatization. So, my friends, the real question is not whether the US has cleared Pakistan's IMF loans. The question is, what price will Pakistan pay for this so-called relief? Will it be sovereignty? Will it be the freedom to chart its own economic destiny? Or will it mean yet another round of dependency, where decisions about Pakistan's economy are made not in Islamabad, but in Washington, D.C.? Ladies and gentlemen, I close with this thought. Debt is not just numbers on a ledger, it is power. And when power shifts hands, the world should always ask, who truly benefits? For Pakistan, the answer lies not in short-term relief, but in building an economy independent of the IMF cycle, one that serves its people, not its creditors. Until that day comes, every so-called bailout will simply be another link in the chain of dependency. Debt has always been presented to the public as a form of relief, a lifeline extended to struggling economies, but in reality, it functions as one of the most powerful instruments of control in the modern world. When the United States steps into the IMF arena and takes the stage in discussions about Pakistan's loans, it is tempting to believe this is about compassion, about helping a partner nation overcome its financial burdens. Yet the history of international lending reveals something far more strategic. Debt is rarely about charity, it is about leverage, and leverage is the currency of geopolitics. Consider the psychology of debt itself. A country in debt is a country with obligations. Those obligations dictate its policies, its budgets, and often its priorities. When Washington involves itself in clearing or restructuring Pakistan's IMF obligations, the true objective is not to reduce Pakistan's pain, but to secure influence over Pakistan's choices. This is the quiet bargain that debt always imposes. We will help you survive today, but tomorrow you will act in accordance with our interests. And this is where the hooks become clear. To the ordinary citizen, it may sound like a reprieve, a chance to breathe. But to the architects of global finance, it is an opportunity to fasten the chains of dependence a little tighter. Think for a moment about how this plays out historically. The IMF itself, since its inception, has rarely functioned as a neutral banker. Instead, it has served as a channel for the interests of the most powerful economies, led primarily by the United States. Its policies, whether privatization, liberalization, or austerity, reflect the economic ideology of its largest shareholders. When Pakistan accepts loans through this system, it is not just accepting money, it is accepting a model of governance, a set of instructions that limit what it can do domestically. Now imagine Washington stepping in and saying, "We'll ease the pressure for you." It sounds benevolent, but in truth it deepens the message. Your financial survival remains in our hands. Hooks like these are rarely visible to the casual observer. They do not make headlines, but they shape decisions that will define the trajectory of a nation. For example, if Pakistan's loans are cleared under US influence, it may be compelled to align its foreign policy more closely with Washington's stance on China or Afghanistan. It may have to open its markets to American corporations eager to profit from privatization projects. It may even be pressured into providing military or logistical support in future geopolitical conflicts. In this way, what seems like a purely economic gesture becomes a bargaining chip in broader struggles for regional and global dominance. We must also examine the narrative that surrounds debt clearance. Governments present it as relief, a break from crisis, yet the underlying structures remain unchanged. If the debt was oppressive yesterday and it is merely restructured today, has the fundamental imbalance shifted? The terms may be softened, the payments stretched out, the penalties deferred, but the obligation remains, and so does the leverage it provides to those holding the keys. The relief is temporary, the control is permanent. What makes this especially important for Pakistan is the context. Pakistan does not exist in isolation. It is a country wedged between competing global powers, a nation that China sees as a vital corridor and that the US sees as a critical buffer. In such a position, debt is not merely about economics. It becomes a battlefield where influence is contested. By inserting itself into Pakistan's debt negotiations, Washington is not just helping an ally, it is positioning itself strategically, ensuring that Pakistan's future decisions, economic, political, and even military, cannot ignore America's role. And this is the crux of the matter. Debt functions as a leash. It may be invisible, but it pulls a nation in the direction the creditor desires. The moment the US clears Pakistan's IMF loans, the leash tightens, cloaked under the language of partnership and support. Yet every hook is embedded deeper: concessions in policy, dependency in planning, and a lingering reminder that sovereignty is compromised not by conquest, but by credit. Pakistan, quote, sets geopolitical value cannot be overstated, and it is here that the motives of Washington become most transparent. To view US involvement in Pakistan's debt purely through the lens of economics is to miss the larger chessboard on which this drama is unfolding. Geography is destiny, and Pakistan sits at one of the most strategic crossroads in the modern world. To its north lies China, to its west, the resource-rich Middle East, and to its east, the ever-complex relationship with India. At the heart of these connections runs the Belt and Road Initiative, with Pakistan as a central corridor through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. In this sense, Pakistan is not merely another borrower, it is a fulcrum in the struggle for influence between East and West. When Washington signals interest in easing Pakistan's IMF burdens, it is not responding to humanitarian needs. It is playing a high-stakes geopolitical game. The hook lies in this calculation. If Pakistan leans too heavily toward Beijing, but if it can keep Islamabad economically dependent and politically cooperative, it safeguards its presence in a region where China is rapidly expanding its influence. Debt, therefore, becomes a tool not just of financial leverage, but of strategic containment. The relief extended today is meant to secure allegiance tomorrow. Consider the timing. As China invests billions into Pakistan's infrastructure, ports, and energy sectors, the US finds itself at risk of being sidelined. By stepping in at the IMF level, Washington reasserts itself as the gatekeeper of Pakistan's financial lifeline. The message is subtle but powerful. While China may offer roads and bridges, the US controls the very oxygen of international credit. That kind of leverage can tilt diplomatic choices, align military partnerships, and shape economic policies far beyond the technicalities of loan repayment. For Pakistan, this creates a dilemma that reaches far beyond its balance sheets. Accept U.S. help, and you strengthen the ties that keep your foreign policy tethered to Washington's agenda. Lean on China, and you risk punitive measures or a tightening of financial pressure through global institutions dominated by the West. This tug of war is the true story behind the narrative of debt relief. It is not about money, it is about positioning influence and the struggle over who writes the future rules of the global order. The cycle of IMF dependency is one of the most destructive patterns in modern global economics, and Pakistan is a textbook case of how this cycle plays out. Every time the country approaches the IMF, it does so under the weight of mounting deficits, currency pressures, and external debt obligations. The promise is always the same: short-term stability in exchange for reforms. But the reality is far harsher. Each new loan is tied to conditions that deepen structural weaknesses rather than solve them. Austerity measures slash subsidies that ordinary citizens rely on. Public spending is curtailed at the very moment when investment in health and education is most needed, and privatization shifts national assets into the hands of foreign corporations. Relief becomes a mirage, visible from a distance, but never within reach. What hooks the country deeper into this cycle is the illusion that the next program will be the one that finally delivers stability. Pakistan borrows to repay old debts, borrows again to stabilize its currency, and borrows once more to cover the deficits created by the very austerity programs it agreed to in the first place. This is not a path to independence. It is a treadmill where all the running in the world brings you no closer to the finish line. Washington, by involving itself in clearing or restructuring these obligations, is not breaking the treadmill. It is keeping Pakistan running on it, ensuring that the IMF remains the only door Pakistan can knock on when crises hit. This dependency also narrows political choices. Each IMF agreement carries with it a subtle but unmistakable reminder that economic sovereignty has limits. Governments that might otherwise pursue industrial policy, protect domestic agriculture, or invest heavily in social welfare are forced to prioritize debt servicing and foreign investor confidence instead. The people who feel the sharpest edge of these policies are not the elites negotiating with Washington or the IMF, but the farmers, workers, and small business owners who find themselves squeezed by rising prices and reduced public support. The most striking hook here is psychological as much as it is financial. Dependency reshapes a nation's outlook, conditioning its leaders and its people to believe that survival is only possible through IMF programs. It ensures that Pakistan's economic imagination remains confined to the options presented by Washington and the IMF, never daring to step outside the cycle. And as long as that mindset holds, the dependency is not just financial, it becomes cultural and political, woven into the very fabric of national decision-making. Debt relief often looks generous on the surface, but it is never without hidden conditions, and those conditions are rarely written in bold letters for the public to see. When the United States steps into IMF negotiations on Pakistan's behalf, the hooks are buried deep in the fine print, embedded in political expectations and foreign policy alignments that go far beyond economics. The logic is simple but ruthless. Money opens the door, but loyalty keeps it open. Washington understands that financial lifelines can buy not just economic compliance, but political obedience, and that is where the true cost of debt relief is revealed. Consider how this operates in practice. A loan clearance may seem to reduce the burden, but it often comes with quiet conversations in diplomatic backrooms. Align your vote with ours at the United Nations. Adjust your trade policies to favor our corporations or provide strategic support in regional conflicts. None of these appear in the public documentation, but all of them form the invisible price tag attached to financial concessions. This is not about economics alone. It is about ensuring that Pakistan remains within Washington's orbit, even when the nation's economic interests might suggest otherwise. The hooks become clearer when one considers the wider regional context. With China expanding its Belt and Road footprint through massive infrastructure investments, Washington sees debt relief as a lever to slow or redirect Pakistan's alignment. A nation less financially desperate is a nation with options. The U.S. works to ensure that those options are framed in a way that serves American interests. In effect, debt clearance is not relief. It is a bargaining chip used to secure influence over Pakistan's foreign policy direction. The tragedy, however, is that these conditions rarely benefit the ordinary Pakistani. While elites may secure new alliances or contracts, the population at large often faces renewed austerity or market reforms designed to open the economy to foreign investors rather than protect local industries. What the public hears is the language of partnership and support, but what they experience is the tightening of conditions that shape their nation's sovereignty. Debt relief thus becomes a story of power disguised as generosity, where the visible gesture hides the deeper reality: financial freedom traded away for political dependency. When debt relief is announced, the headlines almost always tell a story of national recovery and hope. The public is encouraged to believe that international support has arrived, that breathing room has been created, and that ordinary people will soon feel the benefits. But the reality is far more sobering. The actual impact of these financial adjustments rarely trickles down to the everyday Pakistani citizen. Instead, the burdens of debt servicing and structural reforms are shifted onto the shoulders of workers, farmers, and small businesses, while the benefits flow toward elites and multinational corporations positioned to profit from the conditions attached to IMF programs. This disparity becomes painfully visible in daily life. Subsidies on electricity, fuel, and food are often the first sacrifices demanded under IMF conditions. For the rural farmer struggling to irrigate his land, or the urban worker commuting to his job, these cuts translate into higher costs and diminished livelihoods. Inflation eats away at household budgets, while wages stagnate or decline. The state, forced to channel resources toward meeting repayment schedules, reduces spending on education, healthcare, and infrastructure, the very investments that could empower citizens and build long-term resilience. Relief in this context is not relief at all, but a reshuffling of pain from the government ledger to the public's pocket. And yet, in the same moment, privatization opens doors for multinational corporations eager to enter sectors once under public control. Foreign investors, often backed by Western governments, purchase stakes in energy, telecom, and banking at discounted rates, gaining profit opportunities while Pakistan's sovereignty over its resources diminishes. The elite political class, aligned with these deals, secures its own financial and diplomatic advantages, further widening the gap between rulers and the ruled. This is one of the most striking hooks of debt relief. The more it is celebrated publicly, the less it seems to improve the lives of ordinary people. The irony is sharp. The people who suffer most under austerity measures are the very citizens who never negotiated the loans to begin with, while those who orchestrated the deals often insulate themselves from the fallout. It creates a cycle of disillusionment in which promises of recovery sound hollow, and the IMF solutions become synonymous with hardship. Debt relief may provide a temporary headline of optimism, but in practice it entrenches inequality, deepens dependency, and leaves the majority of Pakistanis asking the same haunting question: if this is relief, why does life keep getting harder? The central issue at the heart of debt relief is not whether payments are reduced or schedules are adjusted. It is whether a nation retains the power to determine its own path. For Pakistan, the recurring reliance on the IMF, especially when facilitated by US influence, raises a profound question of sovereignty. True independence is not defined by the ability to wave a national flag or hold elections. It is defined by the capacity to make economic and political choices free from external dictates. Each time Pakistan accepts assistance tied to conditions, it trades a piece of that sovereignty for temporary stability, creating a pattern in which its future is shaped less by Islamabad and more by Washington and international lenders. The hooks in this arrangement are subtle but powerful. A government under debt pressure is a government forced to prioritize creditor demands over domestic needs. Policy decisions about subsidies, taxation, or industrial strategy are no longer made with the sole interests of citizens in mind. They are filtered through the expectations of creditors. This distortion erodes the trust between the state and its people, as citizens see their government serving distant powers rather than addressing their daily struggles. Sovereignty, in this sense, is compromised not by conquest, but by compliance, and compliance is enforced through the chains of debt. What makes this especially critical for Pakistan is its strategic position in global politics. The United States views debt relief as a way to keep Islamabad aligned with its geopolitical goals, while China offers its own economic projects through the Belt and Road Initiative. Pakistan is caught in the middle, a nation with enormous potential, but limited freedom to maneuver. Every time debt relief comes with strings attached, the room for independent policymaking shrinks further, leaving the country as a pawn in larger struggles between great powers. The most alarming consequence of this dependency is psychological. A nation accustomed to external approval for its economic
यूनिवर्सल टेलीविजन को सब्सक्राइब करना ना भूलें। उसके बाद बेल बटन पे क्लिक करें और अपने कमेंट्स के सेक्शन में अपने कीमती जो ख्यालात का इजहार ज़रूर